Hi everyone. In the last video, I said that people now have everything they need to know about following the way that global events are evolved out of history. So this video is designed to clarify how things are continuing to move forward to further prove the theory that we can classify events in terms of the period in which they occur. So in other words, our name for the period we live in categorizes the types of events which occur in terms of technological, social, and political development, and sums up the type of world we're living in. Because of this, culture goes through different phases with things like clothing, fashion, music, art, film, and more recently, social media and interactive video games, which help people to consider new ideas and give us visions of the future. So in terms of where to look at the direction it's all going in now, okay, we have Turkey joining both NATO and BRICS, and others becoming allied with both sides, like the Western-backed Saudi Arabia. And the world has had to move forward in terms of finding a way to resolve the world order issue. So it's important that people understand this, because tomorrow is going to be made out of what happens today. The first thing I want to say on this is that people should actually see it as creating a new socio-political circuit in geopolitics, pretty much like an electrical circuit. It needs to be regulated by certain components to stop it overheating and catching fire. So this is being seen as the solution to the problem which has caused this current crisis involving the Ukraine war and the spin-off war in Israel-Gaza. Yet not just that specifically, but how it has evolved through the whole series of events which span the postmodern era. So secondly, after Turkey being the primary strategic element in this geographically, as it literally joins Europe and Asia, the situation is then further secured by having nations like Western ally Saudi Arabia as partner states in BRICS. So we can see from these new relationships the world has changed sufficiently since the time when the polarization of the big five nations on the Security Council started the Cold War at the beginning of the postmodern age, to see that it's becoming a new age in terms of the way this structure of global society is unfolding. If people understand how certain events are all part of the way that ages change, while others are peripheral, inconsequential, or do not matter at all in terms of world affairs, they can choose where to put themselves in relation to all this. And this is particularly important to businesses and other people who operate internationally. As people at large see what is happening, they will question the whole world system. But then, what else would you expect to arise out of an age known as the postmodern, a situation which is lopsided in terms of world affairs, as one side had the advantage in the period before, that is, the European industrialization occurred in the modern period. So the West had a massive political and economic and military advantage, and then that all collapsed into World War I and II. So that creates the new paradox for the next period. To attempt to overturn the world system would be reversing the way progress has been created globally. And these people who want to do that will actually find there is always a larger reaction from within the world system against them. So even though it's a complex state of affairs, it might seem that we can create the sort of solutions that we might imagine would work. But really, this is only going to happen on a very local level. And this has always been the problem for people trying to create change in world affairs. What we've seen in the past is that improvement can succeed where change is impossible. And certainly given the framework of nations today under the UN system, it seems that this is the skeleton of the world system, which we must understand in order to function. Yet we can all understand it from our own perspective because of the multipolar environment, and that does give everybody a certain amount of freedom. Since the start of the Ukraine war, people have been asking, with Russia having offered to join NATO, and now the Israel-Palestine war in Gaza, why are humans behaving like this? So try doing this. Look at the world map objectively. That is, look at the whole thing, and you'll see all the world's nations. But if you look in terms of the different sets of alliances which are evolved, you can see it was the Europeans who created the countries of the Americas, and that makes up about half the world economy. So if you look at the shape of all that, and then you look at the way that they're pushing into the Middle East with their relationship with Israel and attacking Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and now Iran, then they believe they're winning because they are they are pushing into the other half. So then look at the BRICS alliance. They occupy about half the world in terms of material territory, which is their bottom-up material culture ideology, which counterbalances Western imperialist top-down leadership and blue sky thinking. Russia, China, Iran, India, Pakistan, now Saudi Arabia, Turkey. They also have allied governments, organizations in Africa. And look at the size of all that territory. If they're just pushing into Ukraine, then they're winning. They're pushing the boundaries forward. So how did we end up in this state where both sides think they're winning and yet they're still managing to avoid direct conflict with each other? So it would seem that the realization has occurred on both sides that they need success, yet each is opposed to the other, so they must both operate in their own way. Neither side can actually win, but in creating a winning mentality, the leaders of the world nation can find people to support them and create initiatives which solve their problems as they arise, which does baffle the public as to their true motives, which essentially involve having the job of moving the world forward to another day. Meanwhile, despite being pushed into the background, the UN Security Council can address the issue of the relationship between the superpowers and prevent the war from actually happening, since problems which exist between the two sides have been ongoing. So if one of them gives up their cause and only seeks peace, then the other side will be seen to have started the next war. And we can't have that, because then there would be absolute outrage and cause for an all-out war and retaliation. So we have this state of affairs whereby these proxy wars carry on, making people feel that it's normal. So the world system can let off steam, and the issues they raise allow people to understand how to improve in terms of politics and resolve issues and introduce new protocols which move the world forward at the highest level. And people in the media can see that the whole situation is developing in a situation in which we can create approval from the voters and the mass population in most countries at least. However, it means the world system cannot give up. It cannot have peace. Security protocols must be enforced at all times, especially around the nuclear weapons. And the people of each nation, therefore, must be educated so as to mean children are effectively brainwashed by the system which tells them who they are and what we need to achieve and the way that we need to do it and the sort of people that we need to create. So make no pretense about it, because of what we must do to create effective new leaders who passionately understand the way things need to be in terms of how to design, manage and maintain the existing processes. Then they need to see why the political spectrum ranges from Nazism through fascism, conservatism, monarchism on the right, to liberalism, socialism, communism, and finally anarchism on the left, because the biggest protest really against the way progress is created is simply non-conformity. Hence, since people believe strongly in the direction things are going in, some of them do, while others want to create change, but ultimately there must be a place in politics for them to go if the change they want is too much, or if they oppose the change, where they can be with other people who can understand and manage them. And the problem is really that the world has to move forwards in a particular way, and the issue is so serious that some fight to defend the way progress is created, while the antithesis of the capitalist world system found in communism has been reduced to a synthesis through the Cold War, which created the mixed economy we have today. So there is no real space for any new opposition to the world system and its politics, as this is the best we can do at this point in time. And that's really how the problem of terrorism arose, because the world simply ran out of space to solve its problems in. So what we need really is a world system which functions in the moment. And because we're unable to get away from that, we're unable to get out of this spread of political ideas. And that's why a lot of people are looking to the Anthropocene for growth in the range and the depth of ideas that we can get away from this. I mean, the whole problem of the problem of the war on terrorism was sorted out through the multipolar environment, hopefully, which has brought equal responsibility on the world's nations for global security and the well-being of citizens. So people who run governments do understand what's happened and that it is about the shape of the world system that we've created. And I guess the Anthropocene will bring a new type of understanding, but only through the realization, really, about the way that it's all occurring. That's the only way we're going to be able to solve the problem, because the nature of the problem with the structure of the postmodern age. So it looks like the world's great nations are really just like chess pieces in a massive series of power games, which are played over time using social hierarchies with real people's lives at stake. But there is a real point to this due to the existential crisis with the way the world system has evolved in such an irregular shape over the course of time, so as to make a whole new period of problems which are left over from the last, as the world broke down into World War II trying to solve the problem of the world order itself. Now it may surprise everyone that this current situation gives way to the feeling that everyone is winning. Nonetheless, the distribution and range of ideas is always increasing, as everyone's personal paradigm tends to evolve, and so as long as we keep discussing today's issues, we can create solutions to contemporary problems. And as soon as we stop to do that, then we're going to be unable to move forward. So that's why all this stuff has got to come out. No matter how bizarre the world around us seems to work, this is why education and training handle the types of situation which arise, and job shadowing goes all the way back to the emperors and co-emperors of ancient Rome. So back to the story of world affairs, for example, how come we've now got Hamas declaring victory in Gaza? Trump is talking about moving all the Palestinians out of Gaza, but this is just another part of the power game between BRICS and NATO. Hamas is advised by Russia and receives material support from Iran. How do they represent the interests of the Palestinian people then if they launch a terrorist attack on an Israeli music festival and then have 60% of the buildings in their own country destroyed? So ultimately they have to say that, because NATO and BRICS can't resolve their issue, and they're in a bit of a corner because they're still getting backing from these big nations, but their own nations now being destroyed. So my prediction is that they'll go and a new leadership will be initiated. So ultimately, in real terms, I mean, it's all caused by the way both the capitalist nations and the communist nations evolved out of the same situation in the European world economy, in which the political spectrum was created that we have today. But then why should it have to involve everyone else, really? Because the way that it's spread across the whole world, and it became a period of history which led to the postmodern. The problem is now that people can't just suddenly consider the way the whole of humanity evolved out of Africa and realize what went wrong, because the way the situation has evolved through all the empires which have existed, and this created all the nations, like the relationships between them, religions, economic networks which have existed since humans began to trade and required systems of government to keep records. The European takeover of the Americas only destabilized the traditional relationship between Europe and Asia. And as a result, the complex situation involving capitalism and communism just became one in a long line of political developments we've had to cope with. In other words, we cannot go to the past and solve the problem from there, but we can look into the future and create a course of action which leads to successfully solving the problems we have now. And then people can realize a new day in terms of what is possible to achieve. There is always going to be some criticism when successive waves of new people wake up to the problems of the world, and new organizations and political groups form, and new environmental activist groups appear. But then comes the answers from government as to why the revisionist view is wrong, which is that people who believe that things could have been done differently, and people will hold inquiries, the world system will carry on to another day as an official assessment is carried out and changes are made. So this is really what Antonio Guterres meant when he said the world's not going in the right direction, as we see it spinning clockwise from the point of the southern hemisphere and counterclockwise from the northern, making global society a constant struggle which no one can win unless we allow for the world to pass through this phase. So that is why having Turkey and various other nations joining both sides of East and West is holding humanity together, as it means that we have something to create a solution out of.